All right. Can you hear me? Good. So yeah, there's been a lot of talks and articles about the benefits of animation and how it can improve the user experience. So this talk is not about that. It's a very practical talk. I'm just going to assume you guys know all the benefits of animation, and Val touched on that point as well. So I'm Stephen Fabre. You can find me at Stephen Fabre on most places on the web, so give me a shout. I'm a product designer at InVision, currently working on design tools, mainly focusing on motion and animations. And before joining InVision, I was running Easy, a web animation tool for designers, while also working at Campaign Monitor here, where I was involved in a lot of initiatives related to motion and animation. So without further ado, let's start the top 10. So number 10, only animate, transform, and opacity. So those are the only two properties that you should be animating if you use CSS for animations, if you want to get smooth animation at 60 frames per second. Here's some example of what not to do on the left and what to do on the right. So it's pretty subtle here, but the animation here is very jerky and slow, and it's a lot smoother. We're animating the movement, and there's a subtle shadow that you probably can't see on that screen. And I'm going to show you, so that's what I see in a lot of places on the web. So people will typically, on hover, animate the top property, and the shadow in that example. It's pretty subtle, so it's pretty hard to see it on that screen. But if you do that, it's very expensive for the browser to render those animations. And here's how you could actually do that thing. There's always tricks around to only animate transform and opacity. So in that case, what you could do is create a pseudo element on the card itself. That pseudo element has a box shadow that you can see here, which has the opacity set to 0.3, so it's a little bit transparent. And on hover, instead of moving the top position, we're using transform, and we're translating on Y by 30 pixels. And the opacity changes to 0.8. So when you do that, you get a much smoother animation. And next tip, number 9, so animate things individually. So that's kind of related to what Val was talking about around follow through. What you don't want to do is that. So you have a gallery of thumbnails, for example, and they all come in at once. That's not very nice. So what you want to do instead is animate things individually. So in that case, you make them one come after the other with a little delay on each of those cards. Number 8, keep your animation fast. So that's an advice that I see a lot on the web. People telling that you should be using animation that lasts for like 300 milliseconds max. But in a lot of cases, I disagree with that because perceived speed is what actually matters. In fact, if you're using cubic Bezier, like Val showed earlier, if you use like a normal easing, the time it takes to complete the animation, if you use a custom cubic Bezier, it will finish faster. And number 7, you want to use custom easing. So Val touched on a lot on that before, so I'm going to go over it pretty briefly.
Your slide is better.
Thank you, I appreciate it. So you want to use cubic Bezier. That gives a lot of personality to animation, and obviously you can use cubicbezier.com. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's pretty nice. And I'm going to show you a cubic Bezier curve that I use all the time. And I used it on my product, on the sign-up form. So as you can see, the model comes in, and it's slightly bouncing at the end. The way I do that is to use a curve that's very similar to what you see here. And my trick is to always keep, that's my personal taste, by the way, you don't have to follow exactly what I say, but keeping that second anchor point there, keeping it horizontal, that way when the animation gets to the top, it kind of slows down very nicely at the end and makes the animation very smooth. There's something as well that I'm pretty excited about that people are starting to talk about is the spring property for transitions. So that will let you, I'm not sure if it's going to go through, but that will hopefully let you create elastic curves and that kind of stuff without the need of JavaScript. Number 6, prefer transition over animation wherever you can. Sorry, Val. So the reason behind that is because when you use animation keyframes, you need to name the animation first, which is it's always hard to find names for things in computer science, I find. No need to write keyframes, and my personal taste is that it's probably a cleaner code. Tip number 5, apply physics to your animation. So I've got a bouncing ball as well. Look at that. Just one bounce though. So as you see here, it's kind of following the principles that Val was talking about. If you play that in slow motion, the ball is actually squashing at the end, so that we are playing physics, like the ball is decelerating as it goes up, and it's kind of accelerating as it goes down. So you want to follow those principles. When you animate things, try to apply physics to them. Tip number 4, so when you don't use transitions and you use animation, a trick that I find really useful is to apply animation timing function property within the keyframes themselves. That way, you don't have to recreate manually the keyframes yourself. I see a lot of cases where people, in that case, they would put 20 keyframes with all the points where the ball should be at each frame. Instead, what you want to do is have 2 keyframes here, 0% and 100% of the animation, and at 50%, which is when the ball is at the bottom. Sorry. What it does here, what I'm doing, I'm applying a custom easing curve, which makes the ball slow down when it goes up, and that makes the ball go fast when it goes down. And to apply that physics that I was talking about earlier, I'm squashing the ball when it gets to 50% point to increase on the x-axis to be 1.06, so it makes that little squishy effect. Number 3, embrace JavaScript when you want to create more complex animation. And here I'm going to show you an example that I've worked on with Bradley here at Campaign Monitor last year for a Ship It project. So we created that landing page in a day that shows what Campaign Monitor is about. It's actually pretty slow here. The recording was kind of shows you what's going on. There's a lot of animations chaining one after the other. And the thing with JavaScript is that you can create much more advanced animations. And the key here is that I'm still using CSS to render those animations, but I'm using JavaScript to trigger the animations. That way you can chain the animations, which is pretty sweet. You can create more advanced logic, and you avoid repeating yourself. And it's also, I would argue, easier to maintain, probably. Because if you use CSS, you would have to add custom delays all over the place, and it would be pretty complicated. So what I used for this landing page is animate from Benjamin Lecoq. He built that tool, plugin, I don't know how you want to call it. And basically, it's kind of good because you pass in a few parameters, you give them the element that you want to animate, the properties that you want to animate, and what's good about it is it forces you to only use opacity and transform. And then when the animation is complete, then you can call another function and do those chaining animation that way. Tip number 2, test your animation. So what I do when I test animations, first thing that I do is play animation at low speed. That way you can see where things are wrong. Like if you see that at normal speed, it's actually hard to find things. So I'm going to show you. It's basically what Val showed you earlier. But you can in Chrome you can get that timeline view for animations, and you can play it at low speed here. You can enable it by clicking the more icon on the left here, and then you can play at 25% or 10%. Another trick that I use for testing is enable paint flashing to test rendering. That is very useful to see elements on the page that are being repainted, and you can enable that through that menu as well. So in rendering here, you enable paint flashing, and at that point you can see what's being rendered by your browser. You can see here everything's being rendered. And the more green boxes or red boxes that you see on the screen, that means the more expensive it is for the browser to render. And something that's particularly expensive to render, and there's a quick fix for it, is it's very expensive to render anything that is fixed. So that includes fixed element and also background attachment element. So if you attach a background in fixed position, the browser is going to render the entire page every time. That fix, you can fix that by using will change transform. That's going to force the computer to use the CPU, and that will render the page much faster. You have to be careful though, because if you apply that property too many times, then everything's going to be rendered on the GPU, and things are going to start to be slower again. And the last one, which is pretty interesting. Have fun doing it. I think this is probably the most important advice, honestly. In my opinion, if you don't have fun when you do your job or do what you do, it's going to be hard to get something that's good. So I felt pretty bad not having any animation on this deck, so I added some animation on the last slide. Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Do a Q&A. Cool. We'll just do another Q&A with Stephen as well. Who's got questions? Hi.
I didn't write a book, sorry.
Maybe Stephen's got giveaways. I don't know.
This is a super dumb question, but have you ever unit tested animations?
Oh, sorry.
Just a random question, but have you ever unit tested?
Nope. Sorry.
Where's your accent from?
Pretty hard to guess, isn't it? I'm sure you know.
Melbourne.
I grew up in France. Yeah.
Hey, that will change property.
Yes.
I've never seen that before.
Yes.
Is that like super new or?
I don't know. It's probably 4 years old. I would say 5 years old. Chris, what you know? Yeah. Yeah, about 5 years old. It's not supported by all browsers. So you can. There's some other trick. I think you can use. If you apply transform, translate, 3D. That will force the browser to use the CPU as well. So yeah.
Thanks.
No problem.
That answered it. I was going to ask, was it CPU or GPU?
Oh, did I? GPU, my bad.
Oh, it's GPU?
I don't know actually. Is it CPU or GPU? GPU, right? All right. Did I say CPU all the way? All right.
We'll find out in the video.
All right.
That library you're using to animate.
Yeah.
Is that injecting CSS?
Yeah. So that's what. Yeah. So we use CSS to render the animation. So that's basically injecting CSS in line on those elements.
Injecting style tags.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Oh, thank you. Oh, we've got a couple.
Why would you use classes to do that? So
Well, you could use classes. Like the main advantage of using JavaScript is like as I said, is to create more complex animations. If you want to use classes, that means you will have to create a lot of keyframes animations, and then you'll have to. It's going to be impossible to chain animations in CSS. So then that means you'll have to add a lot of custom delays and that kind of stuff. I guess what you ask, you could probably create like classes and then apply those classes. You could do that as well. But then if you want to add some more logic to the like the timing and that kind of stuff that you want to apply, then that's where JavaScript comes handy, I guess.
Anyone else? One last one. No more? Oh! I knew that's gonna happen.
I know only Transform and Opacity is animated, but I really like filters. Do you have much experience
I don't have much experience with filters or SVGs now.
I mean, it's WebKit filter, but I mean, because you can also use like the opacity sort of function in filters, and it is a separate layer, so as well by default by being a filter. So that.
I don't know, to be honest. I don't have much experience in filters. But I'd love to hear about them if anyone knows.
Hey, question. What's that question? I love it. Usually people are too shy.
So, how would you suggest animating with an element like you added little thumbs up boxes along with it? If you were taking one out of the flow, how would you recommend like transitioning to like maximum for width?
Are you talking about the 4 cards type of thing?
Yeah,
or?
just saying if you have like 4 cards, you have to take one out, like the second one out. How would you suggest that?
Oh, like you mean like making them come in one after the other?
Imagine you're deleting the second one.
Oh, you delete one. How do you? Yeah.
How do you? Is there a more?
Like if you delete one, how do you reorganize all the cards?
Just to subtract the space.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, there's some cases where it's actually hard to stick to transform and opacity, obviously, and I've animated max height in a lot of cases. Depends. Like there's always a way around it, but then probably you can over-engineer it, I guess. You can move elements individually and like calculate where they should be positioned and that kind of stuff. But yeah, sometimes I don't think it's worth it.
Please give it up for Stephen.
Thank you.